Welcome to Season 1, Episode 4 of Digital Dissection, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look into our favorite properties. Today's episode dives deep into the Assassin's Creed franchise, the Ubisoft property that has ups and downs since its massive debut in 2007. We're here to talk about that trajectory and our personal take on what's happened since.
But before we analyze how nothing is true and everything is permitted, here's a few housekeeping items. We are Joe and Mark, the two guys talking to you today. You're mostly humble hosts who manage this homegrown operation. After you've enjoyed this conversation, please help us by liking, commenting, and subscribing at the Digital Dissection Podcast on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook by searching for @DigitalDissect1 or Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast. You'll notice we say this unapologetically every week. What this does is help us grow and to keep providing that sweet, sweet content you crave. You know, Joe, I remember one of the earliest bonding moments we had was pretty much, well, outside of drinking, at the same college and somehow missing each other at every possible turn.
Yeah, that still baffles me how we completely missed that. we hung out with some of the same people, had some of the same favorite places to be around in campus, basically had the same major for a few years, never saw each other.
Literally the same building. I mean, same professors. I have no idea. But it was through that discussion and starting to talk about things that we had in common that we discovered that we both secretly were huge Assassin's Creed fans.
Yeah, we were wearing our white hoods on the inside, and not wait. I should rephrase that, because that could, if you're not familiar with this franchise, that will go the wrong way really fast. So.
Yeah, that's
that's bad.
That's horrible.
That came out all sorts of wrong.
Wow.
We could do better. Yeah.
That's okay. To the credit of the Assassin's Creed, I mean, they kind of brought back, wearing these cool hoods, right? Like these are hoods that have that beak that comes off of it, which, is just a huge call to the series being tied in with Birds of Prey and kind of tying assassins and these birds that kill prey animals, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the themes that you see throughout the series. So yeah, definitely not a KKK thing.
No,
just want to be very sure about that.
Not the direction they were going in, or the one that we meant to go in there. Oof, yeah, rough start with the podcast today.
Oh, it's okay though. It's okay. Sometimes we don't know how things are going to sound until we say them, and I would say that is definitely one of them. But I will say that back in 2007, right, we were all kind of trying to call our shot, with the PlayStation and trying to figure out, what the best launch titles were going to be, right? The PS3 had just come out. There were some titles that came out. I remember there was that one where you could basically fly on a dragon. There was this thing called, I think it was called Lair. I want to say it was called Lair.
Okay.
Yeah. It was one of the launch titles for the PlayStation 3. Totally bombed. I mean, It was hard to control. It looked really cool, don't get me wrong. But the game itself just didn't offer a whole lot. And so that's kind of why Assassin's Creed just all of a sudden becomes this refreshing and fairly layered experience. And you just don't usually get that in a launch title.
No, you really don't. And then looking at the PlayStation, like you said, other PlayStation 3 launches, I can think of only one other launch title that really comes close to the series. And again, it's one of my other favorite series. It's probably my absolute favorite series. And that's Uncharted.
Yeah.
But other than those two titles, what you had, Knack.
Yeah, the puppetry one.
Okay. it was what it was.
To its credit, it was still, the stylistic view of that was kind of cool, because you're a puppet and you're basically playing like you're part of a stage operation, so that at least had something interesting to it. But with Assassin's Creed, what we got was this kind of it was almost like the Christopher Nolan effect, where in between the Batman movies, he just gets thrown money and they say, go and make another movie, bring it to us, and we'll see how it goes. And all of a sudden he comes up with Inception, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what Ubisoft did with Assassin's Creed. They come out with this AAA style title, and it's just got a ton of stuff in it that just hadn't really been explored before. We've got this period piece, these period games set in It's actually set in a time during the Crusades, and it introduces people to history in a way that they hadn't seen it before, right?
Oh yeah, completely. And like you said, this first game starts in the Third Crusade. Um, and many people, when they hear the Crusades, they just think it was like one thing, just the one crusade. But no, there were multiple crusades. And the lengths that the game really goes to try and recreate like the town, this not the towns, the cities and the cultures that were like there and clashing at the time, like it hadn't really been done at that level before. Like not even close. I can't think of another game that really did that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, you definitely had like other period games, like you had Dynasty Warriors and everything, but that was more of a over glorification of historical figures, and it kind of made them into these larger than life characters. Whereas this is much more of taking historical figures and really making them more human, I would say, than anything else. It
Or
does a
more
good job
accessible.
of taking
Yeah.
those characters that we normally think of larger than life, and we kind of see just how human they are.
Yeah, I didn't mean to talk over you, but I mean the word accessible is usually what I thought of.
Oh yeah.
Because you take these people that you have images of and you've heard about them in a history book, but then when you're actually presented with something tangible that you can look at, you can try to understand motivations and things like that. Um, that just gives you a little bit more to invest in, because history can be dry. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but ultimately, what the original Assassin's Creed was built on was a pretty solid foundation because it was actually meant to be a sequel to their Prince of Persia series, where you play as an assassin who is trying to protect the next future, king, right?
Hmm.
And as Ubisoft developed this game, their leadership thought, well, why are you playing a Prince of Persia game and you're not actually playing anyone from the royalty?
Yeah.
And so that's how this game kind of grew, or basically went down its own path.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of, that's relatively well known knowledge, right? But
I would imagine,
uh,
yeah. There are a lot of top tens out there, or did you know series that go into a lot of like, and they do a good job of going into the development history of the game.
yeah, but what they
Hmm.
don't go into sometimes are these specific texts that influence, some of these decision making.
Hmm.
So what I wanted to actually bring up was the Alamut, which is a novel written by Vladimir Bartol, and it was actually published, I believe, in 1938.
Oh,
So
that's
what it
back there.
Yeah, it goes back a little
That's
ways.
back there. I mean, you're
Yeah, that's like
talking 14th century.
that's almost Metropolis days back in
Whew.
1938, right? But it deals with the story of Hassani Sabah, who was literally the leader of what was the true life origin or the true life inspirations for the assassins. So the Alamut actually discusses, some of the war at the time, what would be in modern day Iran, essentially.
Hmm.
So what Alamut was actually, it was a castle. So Alamut Castle was actually stormed by this sect of folks in Shia Islam there at the time, and they captured this castle, and Hassani Sabah and his people pretty much they take it over, and they basically start their own. I don't want to call it a crusade because that would be double dipping here, but
Yeah.
they basically started to basically use their skills and their ability to kill people, which they were quite adept at, and they used it to attack individuals in the area, who they saw either as a threat to maybe their claim to
Hmm.
certain things. And so we started to get this early influence of assassins, right? This idea of assassins. And so that's what the folks at Ubisoft used to kind of formulate the assassin order, right? So that's how we got Masyaf Castle, because it was supposed to mimic this Syrian, castle that Saban and his folks actually took over. So that's where that comes from. Now, I will be the first to say that the Alamut, castle looks absolutely nothing like the
Like
Assassin
Monte,
Orders
yeah.
castle.
Hmm.
Yes, yeah,
There was a little liberty taken for the sake of the video game.
yeah,
Hmm.
just slight liberties taken there because Masyaf is a gorgeous castle. it's basically like I mean, when I think of this, I think that the castle itself is maybe like 10 stories up on the side of this mountain, and it's built right into the side of it. I mean, when you play the first game and some of the adjoining ones, I mean, it's a grand thing, right?
Oh yeah.
So first thing I think of is if you're an assassin and you're somebody that wants to go unnoticed, why would you
Why did
have
you
this
build
beacon for
them?
your yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
But even then, like that was definitely I don't know about like maybe having a beacon. That's probably a terrible idea. Having a not so secret hideout for your group of killers. But they were also like, from I recall, or I think what I read, like they actually were very public with their killings. Um, like they actually kind of wanted to be seen doing it, right?
Oh, it's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Hashishin is what they were known as, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now there's some disagreement on how the Hashishin actually carried out some of these assassinations, right? But if you just think of the name Hashishin, what's the root word of that? It's hashish, which
Mm-hmm.
would mean some type of recreational drug, right? If you've ever seen hash, which those of us who have been in college have probably heard of it at least
Mm-hmm.
once. Well, that's where some of this reputation came from. So people thought that the hashishin would, basically take copious amounts of drugs. And like you mentioned, they would go into these high profile assassinations, basically to inspire fear. And that's how some of these guys worked up the courage to be able to do this. They would just get stoned out of their mind and Leroy Jenkins right into a crowd of people and take out that target.
Well, I mean, I just assume that's how you had fun in the 12th century. They didn't have like the comforts we have today, so they had to get really high and just, you know, run into crowds of people and kill them. That was
Yeah, I mean,
fun.
yeah,
I assumed.
yeah. I mean, if you wanted to go punch somebody, you'd just slam a
Mm-hmm.
rock star, not a sponsor, by the way,
No, not a sponsor. No, no,
and
no.
you'd just go right off and punch that guy, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a little bit different,
A
but
little bit different,
yeah,
yeah. Definitely frowned upon today.
yeah, yeah, just slightly,
Little bit, yeah.
but that's ultimately what I think Ubisoft did really well in the beginning of this. Like they
Mm-hmm.
gave us some real world, stories to kind of look back to and understand where they came from in their development, right? Because one of the things that Assassin's Creed did get a bad reputation of as we went was that we got these annual entries,
Mm-hmm.
right? So usually annual entries always inspire fatigue. It's just,
Yep.
just natural how it goes.
Oh
That's
yeah,
why
just
Call of Duty.
oversaturation to any franchise could happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Madden suffers that, Call of Duty suffers that. So that kind of stuff happens. But what I would like to stress about, about Assassin's Creed and some of these other AAA titles is that just because you get an annual entry in a series does not mean that they're just being made quickly to be thrown out the door, right?
Yeah.
A
No.
lot of these games have development cycles anywhere from, I would say on the short end, maybe like 3 years, sometimes as high as 7.
Mm-hmm.
And Ubisoft is only able to do this is because they have teams working concurrently across the globe to do this.
Yeah, they have what? Do they have did they have like two different studios working on these games at any given time?
Oh, it's more than that. I mean,
Oh.
they've got folks based out of Montreal. They've got
Mm-hmm.
folks in France. I think they even have operations in Asian territories now.
Oh, I didn't know about the Asian
Um,
territory ones.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Ubisoft they're a global organization. So for them to be successful and to continue to do this type of development, they have to
Mm-hmm.
have multiple studios constantly working. So that's what I will say is for multiple different teams focusing on all these different games and actually having meaningful things that tie them together. This was a really good foundation to start with. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, now the first game itself was absolutely plagued with some of these monotony problems. You basically go to a location, you have your target that you have to kill, you do some intel on them,
Mm-hmm.
and how you gain the information is the same in every single city.
Yeah, I mean they give you different ways to get the information, but however, like it's the same, like basically you can eavesdrop, you can interrogate, you can meet with some informants, um, and you just do that in every city until you just basically wasn't it like you just did that in every city until you just gained enough information, but you could but the events themselves, eavesdropping, the interrogation, the informants, like they randomly spawned. So you could say do like 5 eavesdropping missions and then you're ready to go, or you could do like 2 eavesdropping, 1 interrogation, and 2 informants. But I mean at the same time, it's still like the same experience each time you go.
And you're mostly correct, except for the fact they
Mm-hmm.
weren't random.
Okay.
And that was the part that made it very like rigid, because they were static experiences. If you
Mm-hmm.
had to go get information, there was a specific spot on the map. You went there, you got it. And really, it almost became humorous because you basically had to get approval, right?
Mm-hmm.
To go kill these targets, and you had to have verifiable information. So it's almost like a journalist, being like his editor says, hey, we got to check your sources, right?
We have to make sure if you're killing this guy, he's got to be the right guy. One, we don't want to make that mistake again.
Yeah,
Two, we got to make sure this guy actually did something wrong.
yeah.
Make sure these are more than just unsubstantiated rumors.
Yeah, if you're gonna 86 this guy, we got to do it right, um but ultimately though, Assassin's Creed, the original game, it introduced us to a lot of cool things,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a different gaming experience. But in the early days of Assassin's Creed, they at least learned from one game to the next, so I will give them
Mm-hmm.
credit for that. One thing though that was nice about the first three games in the series was that the original creators of the game, who worked for Ubisoft at the time, was Patrice Desilets, who worked on the first three games and then left for creative reasons. And then Jade Raymond and Corey May, they all were part of that early team that helped create it. So obviously they did something right, because there's 20 games now. It's worth
Mm-hmm.
over $300 million.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's definitely a lot of good things they did. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let's think of like just kind of like the overarching story going for itself that was really fun to play with. Because like when you look at it, you've got these two secret organizations that are both working behind the scenes and for what they both consider to be the good of the world. One just focuses on like absolute freedom of the people, and the other one focuses on the good of the people through order.
Mhm.
And order usually equals like in this case, at least in the first few games, order is ugly because it's basically like being ruled under someone's boot, and then they're just kind of keeping the masses safe while hurting a few by example. And those are
Mhm.
the Templars. And then you've got the assassins who are working for absolute freedom, and then through freedom, people can choose whether or not to have a good life or a crappy life or what have you. And we're peering into the past of these lives through a story that's also happening in the present through a another protagonist, and which
Mhm.
is also just a really cool concept that hadn't been done before this game, of basically using our DNA's stored memories, which I'm pretty sure, again, not actual scientist, pretty sure it doesn't work that way. Um, they contain information, and a lot of it is actually useless. So if it did work that way, it'd probably be like our ancestors' like favorite colors, favorite things to do on a boring Wednesday night. It would be useless information that's stored, not even the cool stories. But anyway, I
Yeah.
digress.
Well,
Um,
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
ultimately, if this technology did exist, I'd feel horrible for my ancestors, because they'd be like, "Man, this guy has watched a ton of television. Like, this is the majority of what I'm seeing."
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you on the Animus and just the idea of it. Even though some people were afraid of it, maybe being a bit too much like the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
What I thought was really just cool is what you mentioned, is the idea that you can pass down memories through your DNA, through your blood, and that's really what kind of determines this future timeline that you talked about, because there is that balancing act between the assassins and the Templars, and this age old struggle that we see. And then they balance that out with this story in the future, where we get to see how this conflict continues in the modern day.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really really cool that they found a way to balance that in the beginning, where you're not seeing too much of the modern day. You're just getting enough to kind of help carry along the dialogue of the past. And so I will give them credit for that. With launching this new idea and this new IP, that was one of the things they absolutely got right.
Yeah, and then like, they did a really good job of, like you said, like not overwhelming you with the stuff that's in multiple storylines. So with like the present and the past, and the way they did that is they made the present stuff actually be like a slow build. Like it was you're told something bad is going to happen. You're not told what it is, and it's
Mhm.
through these events in the past that you learn one, the location of artifacts that can help prevent this thing, um, this bad event from happening. So you don't
Mhm.
know what the event is for quite a few games, and they just kind of keep slowly building the present line story up until eventually you hit that climax of a modern day catastrophe happening.
Yeah, like, do you remember shareware, like the where you would basically get a demo of a PC game back in the day? You know, like you'd be able
Hmm.
to play maybe like the first hour or 2 hours of the game, and then you had to pay to unlock the rest of it.
Oh yeah.
Like that's kind of what the modern day Assassin's Creed experience felt like, was that, you know, you got just enough of a bit of context, but it was always just a crumb. It was never the whole thing.
Mm-mm.
And so, you know, over time, right, like we had to get through almost 5 games to really understand what that context led to. So that's what I think was one of the strong points of the early days of the series, and we'll talk about, you know, where this kind of goes awry later on. But as far as the themes go of this series, one of the early things I really thought was cool was
Hmm.
that they don't really waste any time telling you what the Assassin's Creed is. It's
No,
it's it's
they don't.
one of the very first things you get. It's not like in a sci-fi movie that's, you know, where they have the title of the movie and they say it in like an hour into it, and you're like, oh,
Oh,
oh, they
this
said
is Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
it. Yeah, they didn't do that, and they delivered it
Hmm.
in a really cool way. But the Assassin's Creed is built on 3 tenets. So
Hmm.
it's stay your blade from the flesh of an innocent. Okay, well, don't you know, don't
Don't
kill
kill again.
don't
That's why you get the information.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
That's why we fact check.
Yep. You hide in plain sight, you
Hmm.
know, and never compromise the brotherhood. So, you know, it's kind of funny how we had our, you know, our discussion about robotics and Asimov. You know, now we're looking at 3 other roles that are kind of similar. What I do think that Assassin's Creed did really well with this was that they do also drop some information later on in the series about how the creed itself is a contradiction.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if you remember this when we find out that the Romans had some, you know, some commentary on the creed itself, but their contradictions were, how can the assassins promote peace but still murder people? And how can they have open minds but demand obedience? And if blind faith is dangerous, why do they practice it? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you're introduced to this right away, like you're thinking, this is interesting. Like you've got warring, you know, groups of people worldwide, and it doesn't really seem like their methods are that far separated.
Hmm.
And so I think it was really cool that they mentioned that right away, that there's a little bit more to read into than just the simplicity of the creed itself, and there's going to be more consequences behind that too later on. But the first game itself, you know, focuses on Altair ibn Lahad, who was the, you know, this maverick of the assassin order in the very beginning.
Oh yeah, he does what he wants. He waits for no one. He's like, no, no, no. This is taking too long,
Yeah,
and I'm not waiting anymore.
he doesn't abide by the creed at
Mm-mm.
all. You know, the dude does whatever he wants, and in the first game, I mean, he breaks literally every tenet within the first like 3 minutes. You know,
Yeah, 3 minutes to break three rules. He sees
it's
no coincidence.
yeah, right away. And
Hmm.
so, you know, I think with him, what was really cool is that when we start to look at the themes of the games themselves, the first game really becomes this redemption arc, because, you know, Altair, his story is pretty tragic, right? Like his
Hmm.
family basically dies. His father dies at a very early age, and so he has to basically rise through the ranks of the assassins pretty much on his own. And I believe he becomes the youngest ranked master assassin that the Brotherhood ever had. So
Oh.
he has this tremendously quick rise within the order, but he does these ridiculous things, and so, you know, that's what leads to him being stripped of his rank in the very beginning. If you remember, he breaks all the tenets of the creed,
Hmm.
and then, you know, his mentor Al Mualim, you know, pretty much slices up his gut and tells him, heal up and get better, boy.
Yeah, which is also a great framework for just gaming in general, because then you have to earn all those things back, so you get slowly introduced to new mechanics throughout the game. So you get new weapons and new skills because you've been stripped of the weapons and stripped of the gear that allows you to do the skills. So it was just really like, it was fun storytelling and just good, like, gameplay mechanics wrapped into one nice little package.
Yeah. I mean, I know some people complained about it because it felt like it was a little too telegraphed.
Hmm.
I don't even really know what that means. For me, I was just in the same camp you were.
Yeah.
Like it's that sequel effect, right? Where like your
Hmm.
characters are worse off than they were in the first movie, but in this case, you're worse off than you were
Hmm.
in the first 5 minutes. And
Yeah,
so,
but it's again, it's only 5 minutes. And again, like you can't just make the game be that easy right off the bat. Come on.
yeah,
Yeah, it has to be
yeah.
challenging.
Yeah. And once again, we're talking about themes of redemption here. So it's kind of funny because you're putting yourself in the shoes of Altair, and then you have to go through the same journey that he does.
Hmm.
Like it's just I think it's a nice little mind game, to play with people. But once again, we've talked about how the first game, it sets a lot of cool precedents, but it also leaves some things to be desired. And once
Yeah.
again, this is a reason why Ubisoft was, they were actually doing a lot of good by listening to what people didn't like, and that's
Hmm.
why the next game in the series did so well.
Yeah, and that game, the first game, eventually does get a remaster where they do fix a few complaints that were made when the first game came out. But yeah, going on to Assassin's Creed 2, which is probably arguably um the best game in the series, and if not the most popular game in the series.
I would say amongst fans,
Hmm.
in the early days, yeah. I mean, Ezio Auditore, the main character of the Assassin's Creed 2, and then the following, trilogy, basically that came after that.
Hmm.
I mean, he's so iconic, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
when we think about the periods that the game has taken place in, at
Hmm.
first, the Renaissance just was like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, there's so much stuff going on. It's a beautiful period. Um, why not go to the Renaissance, right? You skip from the 12th century Third Crusade to boom, we're in the 16th century Renaissance.
Yeah,
Life's
yeah, and
good, kind of.
yeah, life was really good
Hmm.
during the Renaissance, or at least you would think that, right? But one thing that did plague, Renaissance Italy and in a lot of the territory, they don't really talk about this in the game. But syphilis was quite prevalent throughout
I
that
was
time.
going that too, and really, when you get into the game, you think the protagonist may have something to do with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Especially he's kind of free and loose, right?
a little bit. I mean, I did hear that he learned French from sleeping with French women.
Yeah, yeah. Ezio Auditore was a player, and you know that I have never hidden the fact that Ezio was my favorite character of the entire
Hmm.
series because, looking at the themes, him and Altair, really do kind of go through that same experience. They both lose their families at roughly the same age.
Hmm.
They both come from families who have a pretty deep history within the Assassin Order. And so when we start to talk about the themes of these games and tying the narratives together and some of these small details, one of the really important things that happened through, I want to say the first maybe 7 or 10 Assassin's Creed titles
Hmm.
was linking the assassins together with just their names.
Yeah.
And that's something that is interesting because of the different languages and how we've got so many different cultures here. But what's really cool about Altair is that his name literally means the flying one, who is the son of no one, right?
Hmm.
And Ezio's name, literally means eagle, right? Eagle or, soaring, something of that nature. So they started to do this throughout each entry. Everyone's name has some kind of importance, whether it's tied to the assassin order itself or being a bird of prey. Because if you look at all of the marketing, imagery for the series, if you take a look back, like a lot of these pictures of the assassins show them, flying in the air, and they look like, like a hawk or an eagle as they dive,
Oh yeah, doing the good
after
old
some
leap of
type of prey.
faith. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. The leap of faith. The I mean, this is kind of the physics and gravity defying act that these
Hmm.
assassins all do, jumping from very large heights and somehow surviving on a bed of hay. I don't know how they do that.
It shouldn't make sense and it shouldn't work, but we just don't think about it. Don't think about it. It's fine.
Yeah, yeah. It's cool. You know
Hmm.
what? I mean, for me, it was really one of the coolest things about the game. Right? Like visually, it always looks
Hmm.
amazing. You get to see the entire city as you jump down. But yeah, the more you play it, it's like there's no there's no reasonable way these people should survive every time they jump
No.
off of a tall building.
And
One or two
especially
times,
like,
sure.
yeah, like I mean, it's even like with that too, like at least like a lot of times like you're jumping into like just like a big pile of something, but then there are the times like you're jumping into like a cart of something. Like, and
Yeah.
it's a small cart. Like there's a very, very small margin of error that can be made while jumping into that cart because one, you should die no matter where you hit it. There's no suspension in that thing, other than like the hay or flowers you're jumping into. So the
Hmm.
fall should kill you. But let's assume, just assume that that stuff will, the soft stuff will protect you. When you're looking at like a wagon that's maybe, you know, 5.5 feet like long, and people back then are probably about 5.5 feet tall. You have to land in it perfectly.
Well, long story short, if I mean, it would be a very short series if you know if reality actually set in, right?
Hmm.
But you know what I think is interesting here is as we're talking about the assassins and who they are as people and the jobs that they have to carry out. Um, when you think about the contradictions that we just mentioned, right?
Hmm.
Tying Altair and Ezio together again is the idea that Altair himself says that one may be two things, and that's one of those ideas that when I think about it, I think about cultures that are like polytheistic or believing in multiple different religions, right?
Hmm.
This is a much more Eastern style of understanding. When you think it's possible to worship more than one god, um, and there are cultures who do this, and so when you think about the duality of that, these assassins a lot of times, they're unwilling assassins, right? Like in Ezio's case, he was a noble. He was just a kid who was running around Florence and doing whatever he wanted to do.
Yeah, getting into gang fights with his brother. With
Yeah,
other, not really gang fights. It's more like Romeo Juliet family rivalries sort of thing.
yeah, it's
Running
yeah, it's the
around doing that
passing.
stuff,
Yeah,
running around on rooftops, having a
yeah,
great time.
yeah, yeah, and so that's something that they really keep prevalent throughout the entire series is that almost every one of these characters lives a dual life of some kind.
Hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean they're living it at the same time, though. I mean, it,
No.
it could mean they're living, different lives based on, what era we're looking at. And that's really what is cool about Ezio is that we get a chance to actually live with Ezio from day one. I mean,
Yeah, like
yeah,
you you you're born. You literally get to see that's like the first trophy or achievement, depending on what platform you're playing, and I think you earn is like, you're moving your limbs as you're coming out of the womb. And then
yeah,
you an assassin's born, I think is what it is, isn't it?
yeah,
That's the name of
yeah.
the trophy. Hmm.
You're 8 pound 6 ounce baby Ezio, and the first actions you take are throwing your little baby arms and legs, and but going into this this rule of being one can be two.
Hmm.
I mean, it really is excellently stated with the journey that Ezio takes, as he lives through his life, and starting from day one all the way up until the end, we get to see exactly what that journey looks like because he goes from from young man who doesn't even understand the world that he's in, to mentor, and then he's basically seeking out answers for everything that he's gone through. And
Hmm.
so for him, I mean, the journey that he takes is pretty profound when you think about it, um, because we've got these tenets, we've got the assassin order and what they live by, but Ezio really is the character who eloquently states exactly what this nothing is true and everything is permitted, what that actually means. Now, you remember how he ends up hooking up with, I believe her name is also Maria, isn't it? His future wife, or is it? I'm trying to remember exactly what her name was.
His future wife is Sophia, isn't it?
Sophia, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
So this idea of contradiction
Hmm.
comes back up, right? Like when he's talking to Sophia when he first meets her, and he's discussing with her like, "This is the life that I live."
Hmm.
She goes, "Well, isn't that pretty cynical to say that nothing's true and everything's permitted? What does that
Yeah,
even
it's
mean?"
in Revelations when this happens. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. What does it even mean? And so Ezio kind of flops that salmon on the table, and and he said something to the effect of, societies have fragile foundations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we must be the people that shepherds that. Like, we need to be the ones who take control of it. And since we're the architects of our actions, we must live with the consequences no matter what they are. And so you take a game that is, you're a person who's killing other people to advance your own, your own wishes, right?
Yeah.
But when Ezio says something like that, it really makes you turn and go, wow, this game is actually teaching me life lessons right now.
Mm-hmm.
That the path that I'm on is one that only I can choose, and I have to, I have to basically pay the toll for whatever that is. And so, skipping ahead just a little bit, because there's a direct correlation to this
Mm-hmm.
and Assassin's Creed Unity. So a lot of people didn't like Unity all that much, right? There was
Mm-hmm.
glitches, there was, launch day problems, all that stuff. But if we just focused on that, we could. But there's so much stuff out there on that we're not going to. What I wanted to focus on, though, is connecting these themes together, because these games were, they came out like 5 years apart, I believe,
I think
maybe
so.
4
Between
years.
Revelations and Unity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely like a 5-year gap here. So Arnaud Dorian, who's the main character of Unity, which takes place
Mm-hmm.
during the French Revolution, he actually says something that mirrors what Ezio is stating, but it's a little bit more profound. And so what he states is that, ideals can create dogma, dogma can create fanaticism. So you have to walk your path and decide if it, if the consequences that it carries is something that you can manage. And if you can't, well, hey, it begins and ends with you. You're the only
Mm-hmm.
one that can impact it. So, kind of like we talked about with our last deep dive, these are insane, like insanely deep, bits of commentary that are coming out of a video game. And Ubisoft they had the care and the understanding to,
Mm-hmm.
to have this appear throughout. So there's a lot of people that look at Assassin's Creed and just go, you know what, I can take it or leave it. It's just a standard game. But it's like,
Yeah.
no, you've got some profound, just things about the human condition that exist within the margins here.
Yeah. I mean, if you, I think someone so uneloquently put it as just another game with a stubbly white dude in a hood. Which, I mean, the first what you didn't get a white dude in a hood until Unity. Before that,
Yeah.
you had a man from Iran, then a man from Italy, and then a Mohawk Native
Yeah.
American, and
Yeah.
then finally in Unity, you got a French guy. And so
Yeah.
like that comment is like, okay, well, I mean, it's kind of showing you're a bit ignorant and you haven't even been paying attention the whole time. The fact that this has been kind of one of the most diverse video game series out there. Um, which I guess the first game did come under fire that a little bit because they that you had Altair did look like Desmond, a lot like Desmond, and that was supposed to be playing on the whole fact that Desmond is going into the memories of the ancestors, so you kind of see Desmond in his place. But then when you
Mhm.
got Revelations, it came with a remastered version of the first game, and they eliminated that. So now you looked more like Altair. You looked like Altair as opposed to looking like Desmond hanging out in Altair's clothing.
You know what, Joe? There is a reason for that. And do you know why that is?
I believe it's the what is it? Do they call it the bleeding effect in the Animus? Well, the bleeding effect was the past now influencing your muscle memory and things you could do,
Mhm.
but more or less it was an issue with the Animus, and rather it was, I think, filling in incomplete data with things that it did know.
I mean, the Animus
Mm-hmm.
is basically a living computer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, we hadn't really been introduced to the modern day assassins nearly as much as we're introduced to Abstergo, which is
Mm-hmm.
the basically the front for the modern day, Templars, and how they've continued to influence the world long beyond the historical events that we're exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of true to form for a lot of these sci-fi movies where you've got good and bad forces working against each other. I will reference the Matrix for a minute here, because in the Matrix you've got the machines fighting against the humans that are left,
Mm-hmm.
and the humans kind of brag about how great their programming is with regards to using the matrix. They've got different programs that they utilize, and there's stuff they can do that machines never can. Well, the idea is kind of the same here, is that the Templars just don't have the best programmers compared to the ingenuity and the struggle of what the assassins had to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because the assassins don't, they're not as well funded. They're a mobile organization that has to travel all around the earth. So that's really what their explanation was that the software and the way that they built the Animus on the Templar side, it just wasn't as perfected yet. So there are certain things about it they couldn't fix. One of them being that there are details that your brain fills in, just like it would in a dream environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Your brain basically it can't make up new things for you. So it has to fill in basically all the gaps of these characters with faces and things that you've already seen.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly what we're talking about here. It's the same idea, but similar to, Bob Gale and Zemeckis not telling you how, Marty and Doc met. It's yeah.
Yeah. You have
This
to
is
you have to find that out on your own through some bonus content.
Yeah, you got to dig deep here.
Mm-hmm.
So, but hey, that's why we do what we do. That's why this is
Yeah.
called deep dives.
Mhm.
That's why this thing even exists that we're doing here, guys. So, um, but yeah, so the early days of this series,
Mhm.
we've got a lot of cool stuff that we can dig into.
Mhm.
There's a lot of this intrigue, and we haven't even gotten to the fact that there's some deeper narrative things about why humanity even exists, and the
Yeah.
idea of the Isu, or the first peoples that basically created humanity as slaves, right?
Mhm.
To build their weapons of destruction and all these other fun things that the assassins and the Templars end up fighting over later on.
Yeah, all the trinkets like the apple of Eden and there's a scepter at some point who's it's not the scepter of Eden, that's a little on the nose. Um but yeah, like basically all these other artifacts that were of the precursor of the first people race that were made to control humanity. And it's them finding these artifacts and using them as weapons against each other, or just trying to, like the assassins, basically use it as the guise of making sure it's not into Templar hands, so it could be used responsibly. Um,
Mhm.
which is a theme all the way until they kind of like turn that on their head for a little bit, but we'll get to that maybe in a little bit. Um, you mentioned like some of the deeper themes that they explore in the series. They often get overlooked. So what's more about that that you want to talk about?
Well, really, what I was going to refer to
Mm-hmm.
was how, just in the spirit of the original games, like we're talking the Ezio trilogy here,
Mm-hmm.
um, when we start to talk about how this ancient race and the tools that they created
Mm-hmm.
impacted the humanity, and what would end up this struggle ended up happening between these warring forces. They actually created at Ubisoft a lot of these fake documents that involved real historical people,
Mm-hmm.
and how a lot of the world's events that occurred, pretty much since the dawn of media and machinery and all this stuff, it was all because of them. And so they created these historical documents about, like, Henry Ford, for example, having utilized the apple, Thomas Edison, having utilized these ISU artifacts to help
Mm-hmm.
create the light bulb and all this stuff. And so when we start to talk about mythos, this was something that Assassin's Creed, they wove into real life. They made it feel believable. And so it really gave you something to attach to, right? Even though it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, this didn't
Oh
actually
yeah,
happen.
it's not real, but
Yeah.
I made it feel real.
Yeah, I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
made it feel real. Like, there are times when you're reading these fake letters and some of these documents that you find in the game,
Mm-hmm.
because there's glitches in the system, and we're not going to give away the entire plot just in case people
No.
haven't played it
Mm-hmm.
somehow. But these are all things that are hidden within the game that you can find, and so they did this consistently for quite a while. But that's kind of where we wanted to talk about, is how the veneer started to crack,
Mm-hmm.
over time. Because the narrative was pretty much connected
Mm-hmm.
for the first 4 games, 5 games.
I'd
Um,
argue 5. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
the first 5 games, up to
Hmm.
and I say the first 5 games, which brings us up to Assassin's Creed 3, right?
Hmm.
There's
This is usually where the fissure, I think, starts with a lot of fans in the franchise. Um, with this particular game.
Yeah, and you obviously
Hmm.
know I'm going to hop all over that because, for one, we
Hmm.
had a fairly unified approach to the combat system within the first
Hmm.
4 games, right? So if you knew how to fight as Ezio in the first game, you knew how to fight as Ezio in the third, and they threw
Hmm.
extra things in there. So already with Assassin's Creed 3, it's kind of working uphill because they changed the combat system. I believe it was a completely different engine as well than everything that they'd built the first 4 games
I think
on.
so. Yeah, it was a completely new combat engine. Or
Yeah.
I, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and so it was unfortunate that I had to play those first 4 games, and then I ended up at Assassin's Creed 3 because
Hmm.
I got so used to this Ezio character and everything that they had done to build it up to that point that 3 became a huge letdown for me. But looking back at it now, I do have a totally different appreciation for it, and probably not for the reason that you would think. Um,
Okay, so what's your appreciation for it now?
Well, so obviously you and I have talked about this
Hmm.
for several hours, and people just don't have time for that. But, but the reason why I
Hmm.
appreciate Connor, or actually Ratona Ketan is his actual name
Hmm.
uh, in Mohawk. But interesting thing about him, we talked about names and how they connect to the narratives, right?
Hmm.
So the names of these characters pretty much all tell you something unique about them that sets up the theme for the game. So for Connor, his name actually means hound or wolf. And do you know why that's important?
Is it because he's a lone wolf?
Yes.
Yeah.
But the
Hmm.
reason why I appreciate it is because he was the first assassin who could actually pet a dog in the game experience. So
That's it. That was the whole thing.
so it was just irony to me
Hmm.
that his name means hound or wolf, and this dude's
Hmm.
petting every dog in colonial America he can get his hands on.
Yeah, you can. You could. Yeah, that was the first game you could pet anything. Well,
Yeah.
most things. Pretty much
Yeah.
all domesticated animals could be pet in that game.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but his name is really cool, right? Not just his
Hmm.
Mohawk name, but the fact that his given name too means strong-willed.
Hmm.
So the fact that he's pretty strong-willed and he's a lone wolf, like, it's already in the name. And if I had known that going into the series,
Hmm.
it probably would have given me a better idea of what I was about to see, because up until that point, we've got these people who lived and breathed the assassin order for the most part, right?
Hmm.
Like they've got family who have been involved in it, and even though Connor's father, Hatham Kenway,
Hmm.
was a Templar, and there's a lot of weaving storyline there. He was really the first one who just didn't live that life. So I think for me that also took me out of it a little bit, right? Because there's romanticism within the Renaissance. I
Hmm.
mean, there's just all of this booming thought, the artwork,
Hmm.
obviously the sexy time we talked about with Ezio and the French girls. And
Hmm.
so that's what took me out of Assassin's Creed 3 at first, is that you've got these massive buildings and
Hmm.
these sprawling cities, and now I can climb a tree or skin a beaver.
And see, I don't know, like I think I had the exact opposite experience because I appreciated how different everything was in Assassin's Creed 3. Um, like you said, you had Altair and Ezio, who did have like these very rich like foundations within the order and within the brotherhood, and they had these more or less metropolises of their time is where you got to play around in. And then you get to Connor, where he does, like you say, have family in the Creed, but Connor he's half Mohawk, half European descent, and he doesn't really fit in either world very well. So
Mhm.
where the other games really focused on different themes, like basically I don't want to say honor, but like tradition and the brotherhood itself, and like and knowledge and gaining of knowledge. I feel 3, its biggest theme is identity because you have Connor, who's got a foot in either world, in both worlds, in both like European and Native American, and doesn't really get to fit in well in either one. And
Yeah.
he gains friends in both worlds, loses friends in both worlds, and then you come to find out on top of that, he has chosen to go with the way of the assassins, but then has a father who is a Templar. And as he's going along, finds out his father is not like the most horrible human being on the planet, as he was led to believe
Mhm.
by his assassin trainer.
Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
me, that's what was infinitely very, very intriguing, is because I thought he played out the struggle of Native Americans, like, I think very well. Is that because on top of that, each time Connor succeeds at something and thinks he's getting away ahead, something happens that just throws him 10 steps back
Yeah.
every single time.
Something tragic, whether it was the death of
Hmm.
his mother at the hands of his father, or whether it was losing his father after them finding common ground despite these
Hmm.
intense differences, right?
Yeah. And
And
then
yeah,
having probably one of the bigger architects of the Templar Order, turning his own, like his best friend from childhood on him to the point where they end up fighting, and Connor ends up having to kill his best friend growing from childhood. Like,
yeah,
everything of Connor's story is terribly tragic. And you just feel like that's that's like sadly a lot of the story of what happens in the Native Americans during the Revolution and onward is,
yeah,
it's just every good thing that seems to happen, there's something else that's holding them back. And that's kind of what happens to Connor consistently. And then when it gets into like other gameplay, yeah, like New York City is definitely not what it is today. So you don't have like the tall buildings to around and do things with. But that's where I love the wilderness aspect of it, like being able to run around, and hilariously the noises that the beavers make when you kill them and skin them um,
it sounds
was,
sadistic, right? But
it sounds sadistic and it's horrible, but like, play
yeah,
Assassin's Creed 3 and kill a beaver. You
yeah.
will
If
change your mind completely.
yeah, if you've got Assassin's Creed 3 collecting dust in the jacket right now, like
Hmm.
just take it out, find the closest beaver, turn your volume up, and
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 just stab it.
you'll find out we're
Hmm.
not just being sadistic here. It is one of the funniest noises I've ever heard. The first time I did it, I
Hmm.
thought it was a joke. I thought like a ringtone went off or something. So I had to go kill another one just to find this out.
Just finally, then you had to kill another one for statistical accuracy. You got to get three in there.
Yeah.
And then
It
like, oh, like the weaponry in that, like I loved the tomahawk, was just brutally fun to fight with.
oh my God.
I
Yeah.
I like, I don't know, like I know you said you struggled with the combat system, and I just took to it. Like I felt like with Ezio, you had to really time counters, where Connor, you could just know the attack was coming, hold on a counter button and wait for the attack to hit. And then you just
Hmm.
got to choose how you wanted to finish him after that. So I'm like, oh, this is no problem at all. And you had
Hmm.
the rope darts, where you could sit up in a tree and then hang him from the tree. And like, oh, and like you could put on like, eagle vision, which famously referred to as pigeon vision.
Yeah.
So
Pigeon vision. I
you
mean,
go all predator on them, and you see like their body heat. Like, yeah, this is great.
I really do wish it somehow could have been
Hmm.
called pigeon vision because pigeons are rats with wings, and it just totally takes the alpha predator idea out of it.
Completely out of it.
Yeah.
And given that like how much pigeons were used in the first like what, four games, because you sent messages back and forth to like the Assassins Guild between you and them. So
Yeah,
pigeons were a huge part of the
it's
game
true.
anyway.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's like eagles, yeah, eagles, hawks,
Hmm.
falcons. Like those are all birds of prey that are somehow woven into the fabric of the names of the characters,
Hmm.
or just the imagery that you see, right? But yeah, the pigeons played a huge part, and so
Yeah.
it's like, why don't we
Hmm.
give them a little love? Like
Why
why
not?
is it?
Yeah, give it pigeon vision. I think it's
Yeah,
great. But yeah, it missed opportunity, counter and pigeon vision, looking like the predator. And again, like, oh, I just like again, like I also just loved, like, I know this is one thing that I also know I use, like basically counters in every major event of the American Revolution.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
the two guys, one horse
mhm,
segment kind of took me out
that
of
was
it.
where it went too far.
Yeah,
The power
but
wheel ride was dumb.
yeah,
Everything else I loved with it. And then again, like I said, like the whole like one step forward, two steps back. And then even with that happening, Connor just perseveres through all of it. He gets mad, he gets frustrated, but at the same time, he refuses to give up. And he just
yeah,
believes he can find his place in the world if he just continues and pushes along the path that he's chosen. And that's just why, like, I love Assassin's Creed 3. This is for any fans, for like any Top Gear fans out there. And this is also a meme. We've got Jeremy Clarkson pointing to the Ford Fiesta, which he absolutely loves, and then there's the Volkswagen Up. Um, and he says, "This one is brilliant and it's perfect." And he's pointing to the Ford Fiesta, but I love this one, and he points to the Volkswagen. That's what this is for me. Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood and Revelations, they're the Ford Fiesta. They're perfect for little hatchbacks. But Assassin's Creed 3 is my Volkswagen Up. Um, it's like how like everyone's dog is their favorite dog. Like to me, like I've got my tiny corgi. He's my favorite dog in like infinity. But like you could have someone who's got this awesome German Shepherd who listens to commands like at will and can do all these crazy things. Arguably that dog's better than mine, but my dog is my favorite dog, and that's Assassin's Creed 3. He's my corgi.
And I knew that 3 was going to be a potential crossroads for
Mhm.
our opinions here because, obviously you and I both loved Ezio, and we both loved Altair,
Mhm.
and the way that they finished that story was just beautifully done, because you've seen the struggle of the assassins and the Templar, and
Mhm.
you've played this game for, we can probably estimate a solid 100 hours, right?
Oh,
From
easily.
1 to 4,
Mhm.
and they intersected Altair's and Ezio's story in such a beautiful way, in such a meaningful way, because they both came to the same realization after a point that knowledge is power, yes, but too much power is dangerous. And they both understand this. And at the end of Ezio's, journey,
Mhm.
what he comes to the realization of is that he was meant to be a conduit for a message that was way beyond any understanding he could have, because these tools that the first people left behind
Mhm.
created the ability for generations to talk to each other over thousands of years, right? And so Ezio, this master assassin, like the guy that everybody wants to be, you know he all of a sudden, after all of these accomplishments, he strips his armor down and understands that, no, what I'm here for is one moment, and it's for me to give a message to Desmond in the future.
Yep.
He doesn't know who Desmond is. He's only heard
Mhm.
his name before, but that's what he realizes. And so that triumphant moment, I think, is kind of what took the air a little bit out of Assassin's Creed 3 for me. But at first glance, I didn't give Assassin's Creed 3 enough of a shot because I just kind of based it off of the themes we'd already seen.
Mhm.
We've already got revenge once in Assassin's Creed 2,
Yep.
and we got revenge again in this. But to your point, it is much more of like a coming of age story.
Mhm.
And I started to see more of myself in Connor the second time around than I did before. And it has to do exactly with what you mentioned, is that he is a product of essentially a biracial marriage. And so am I. My brothers and I we're all, part of a biracial makeup, right?
Mhm.
And so, like you mentioned, you've got feet in two different worlds. And I think the toughest thing for, at least for me as a biracial person, was that I had more people telling me what I was as opposed to just trying to understand it for myself. And so Connor goes through that exact same thing. He's being told by people, how to act and what to be, and he's introduced to these two different worlds. And that's where a lot of the struggle happened for him in the beginning. It's not knowing truly where his place is.
Yeah.
And he begins to understand this as he goes, and it
Mhm.
makes him so relatable in a way that I never thought of. And so after that, after I had, I literally grew with that game. And it sounds ridiculous, but I did. I grew with that
Mhm.
game, and it really, I mean, I wouldn't say like I had to heal or I needed help to get there, but somebody might. And that in this kind of game, I mean, with the themes that they have within it, you can absolutely pull meaning from that.
Oh yeah. And uh I can't help but point out when you said grow with the game, I'd like to point out now for those of you listening at home, Mark's first playthrough of this game, he just blew through it so much just to get it done. That to get the platinum trophy, he had to go back and do a lot of side quests. Well, spoiler alert, in Assassin's Creed 3, your mentor dies.
Good old
Mark
Achilles.
played, yes, Achilles dies, and Mark plays through the game, still has these side quests to go to. Achilles is a part of some of those side quests. So I went back to play them for Mark because he had no interest in finishing the game, but I'll just do it because I loved it. And then Achilles came back to life, which at first, like, okay, you know what? he'll just be there for the missions, but as soon as the open world starts, like he'll be gone. No, Achilles
Nope.
came back, and you could simultaneously see him walking around and his grave
Yep.
at the same time.
We had a moment where Achilles is literally walking right in front of his grave. and your first words were, wait, you played so little of this game that someone who's dead is still living. How is that possible?
Yeah, that's just where you've gotten with that game. Like, no, I'm done. I'm just gonna go through it, play it to play it. It's out of here.
Yeah. Oh, it was total frustration for me. But like I said, I did come back to it with a totally different appreciation, and this is a very important point for the series. It's not just because it was one of the more popular ones, like Assassin's Creed 3 from a sales standpoint. It actually sold the most amount of copies the fastest for any game in the series, right? Like people were all hopped up on buying this, on day one. And so I don't have the data for Odyssey and Valhalla, the most two recent entries in the series. But I know that Valhalla is the best performing one of all time, right? Like it sold the most amount of copies within certain time frames, but Assassin's Creed 3 still remains the game that sold the most copies the fastest. So the hype was there, people were all about it. And I mean, and ultimately, it is a cool era. Like if you're a United States citizen, and you've got any interest in history, it's something that I think you're just going to be, naturally gravitating towards as it just breeds interest, right?
It does. And I'd like to think that, or I think it's time to point out that although this is my favorite game, I do think this is the game where this franchise does take a turn to the point where I think we both began to lose interest in it.
Well, because there's a critical problem that happens at the end of Assassin's Creed 3 that causes things to really become disarray for the next several entries in the series. But I'll definitely let you explain what happened.
Yeah, so like we said, you've got your foot in the modern world and the past, and you're trying to figure out how to stop this this bad thing that's like slowly been building. You've been learning about through the past. It's going to happen in your own current timeline. Well, that bad thing is finally about to happen in the current timeline. You're now, as the present day character Desmond Miles, you're going to go and stop that thing from happening. And the last piece of the puzzle and how to stop that was a part of Connor's memories. So when you find that last piece that you need and you stop that bad thing from happening, it kills Desmond Miles in the process. So you lose the cohesive modern day storytelling aspect of the series. And it'd be one thing if like they consider like, you know what, maybe we'll keep making games and we will just focus on the past, which is basically what they do anyway, but maybe just completely leave out the future stuff. They don't do that. Instead, starting with Unity, they make the modern day stuff basically a video game. Like you're working for Abstergo, who's developing a video game, which is basically the memories of the assassins. And that's how you're just trying to get information is out of people playing your video game. And it's just, I don't know, I don't think it just doesn't work. Like I'm not attached to that. Like Unity was kind of fun where like you've got characters who are part of Desmond's story are helping you as a game developer to try and figure out more of like what's going on at Abstergo. So that's kind of interesting. But then I think that more or less stops when you hit Syndicate. Well, not Syndicate, Black Flag.
Like they reference like the team that Desmond works with to infiltrate Abstergo, and then
actually I take it back. I messed up. It was Black Flag is where that was, and that's gone in Unity. But continue.
And so ultimately when we lose Desmond at the end of Assassin's Creed 3, the way that I've always tried to help people visualize this is that if you get a sandwich, right, and you've got all of the ingredients of the sandwich, killing Desmond is like basically taking everything out between the slices of bread. And so now we've got to build this thing back up. And so after these narratives and all of these themes that we've got from 5 games and hundreds of hours of experience at this point, now we're thrown into something that doesn't have any kind of character that we can tether to, try to understand we're just in the simulation now. And so that's not to say we don't get good characters out of this, though.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
Edward Kenway is absolutely one of the most complicated
Mm-hmm.
characters in the series because he's a pirate, but he's also a father,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got all of these things that he's trying to balance, right? And to go back to the name thing, right? Like how they name characters. So Edward Kenway's name literally has to like do with either wealth, prosperity,
Mm-hmm.
but it also could mean a protector or guardian. And
Ooh.
so in Edward's case, he's literally the protector of the observatory, which, if you remember in this game,
Mm-hmm.
is what the Templars are trying to access, because if you have a blood sample of an individual, you can find them with the observatory.
Yeah.
And so it's almost in the same vein as what the Animus does in the present day. If you've got someone's blood sample, you can access anything that they knew.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that that much pressure would be put on a character like Edward Kenway, because I think it was a refreshing change from the Connor story, right? Like you've got these pretty heavy-handed themes that are introduced to you. But then you've got the swashbuckling, a golden age of piracy, beautiful scenery.
Yep, literally just out to basically not have a 9 to 5. That was Edward Kenway's goal. He's like, you know what? My wife got me a job working at her dad's farm. That sucked. Hated it. Don't want to do that again. You know what I'm gonna do? Kill this dude in his fancy white hood. I'm gonna take his shit.
Yep.
And I'm going to like basically live on the 7 seas and become rich this way because that's a lot better. And then he just kind of gets thrust into the brotherhood in the midst of all of that. And he goes with it. He goes with it pretty well. He's like, yeah, I guess like I came in, I was in this for the money, but I suppose if there's a greater task at hand, I'll be a part of it. But I also like to point out like trailers for these games have always been epic.
Oh my God, yes.
And Revelations and Black Flag had some of the best like musical mixes for their trailers, where you had Revelations had this great song by Woodkid called Iron. It was just beautifully mixed in with it. And then you had Black Flag that had Start at the Bottom by Drake, which again, it describes exactly what Edward was kind of doing in the first place. And right in between, you have this amazing scene of Connor fighting through the revolutionary battlefield to coming home, which made zero sense at all. It's like that. I get it's popular, but it doesn't fit. What the hell were you thinking?
And honestly, it was like the one miscue.
Oh, total miscue.
I think they made, because you're dead on. Like the trailers for this series have always been just crazy well done. I mean, even in Unity, they did the cover of Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Oh yeah, by Lord, and that it was awesome. Like I got really hyped for Unity with that.
Yeah, I got goosebumps from watching that trailer, and that is one thing that I think Ubisoft did just misfire a little bit, because they were always so solid with themes, right? Even up until, like you mentioned, in Black Flag, because in Black Flag, one of the most powerful statements that ever came out of Assassin's Creed happened in this one. And it's when Blackbeard and Edward are basically fighting for their lives, and Blackbeard ends up dying. But just before he dies, he says, in a world without gold, we'd be heroes, right? And so that actually starts to lay the groundwork for these questionable morals, right? And which fight actually matters between these two, warring factions, right? Because it begins to get muddied in this game. It gets even worse with Assassin's Creed Rogue, where we literally play an assassin who turns because of, some of these questionable decisions of the Assassin Order. The same thing occurs with Unity, where you literally are raised an assassin. You've grown up with an assassin father, and then you're adopted by a Templar family, and you fall in love with a Templar, And so that's where this, like I said before, the veneer begins to crack quite a bit, because you've had these heavy-handed topics about what faction is actually doing the right thing.
Yep.
And so now we have no clue.
Yeah, and then there's never like a solid course correction for that. There's never like, yeah, the assassins may have done some questionable things. However, look at all this other awesome stuff we do and how we've been trying to make up for that. They never really try doing that. So you kind of lose the plot in all of it. Like, okay, well, like the modern day stuff is gone. Yeah, Desmond saved the world. I guess that's really great. But at the same time, the Templars weren't even the cause of that world ending thing.
No.
It was a natural disaster that was going to happen.
And
So
they still weren't even trying to do anything to save the planet despite knowing
no.
about this.
Mm-hmm. So like okay, so this whole build that was coming up wasn't even a Templar like thing. So like were they really that bad? Because our group's doing just as many crappy things
Yeah.
and there's no course correction to it. The modern day story just isn't there anymore after after three's done. So you're really hoping, at least I think Ubisoft is really hoping that at least like their in-game stuff, assassin content would be really fun. And or like would be basically the big draw to keep like the story going. And it does for the most part. And Rogue makes you question things, but still a really fun game.
Oh, game too.
Unity,
Yeah.
I think, was my biggest struggle in the series. It was my equivalent of three, where like the combat system was different and I hated it. It was the one where I experienced the most like glitchy issues with it. I absolutely could not stand the protagonist Arno as being like some weird lovesick puppy. And that's basically he's just mad that his girlfriend's a Templar and isn't paying attention to him. Is why he joins the assassins.
And to once again quote Jimmy Woo, it's an oversimplification, but yes.
Yeah, completely oversimplification. Like it's there are a lot more complexities along the whole thing, but that's I was just so mad at the game at the point that that's just where my head steered towards it. Um, but then what was kind of great is actually the next entry in the series was Syndicate, and that was a lot of fun. That was a really great game where you got to switch off between the Frye siblings, between Evie and Jacob Frye,
Mhm.
in early 19th century London. Really fun
Yeah.
game.
Beautiful era
Mhm.
too. I mean, now not if you actually look at the
Oh
state
no,
of the
no,
streets and how people probably didn't shower very often, but
probably not. Lots of human waste in the streets is what I'm assuming.
yeah.
Yeah.
and and that is one thing I want to mention about Syndicate that was really nice
Hmm.
was that when we start to look at this name analysis that we've dove quite a bit into,
Hmm.
now Jacob and Evie Frye, their names do mean something slightly different than what we've seen with the other assassins. So they still do give you a pretty good amount of insight into what they're going to be doing in this game though. Now Jacob's name literally means nips at the heel, which
Oh.
if you remember, he's the one who kind of controls the street toughs that are putting all this pressure on the Templars across London, right? So his name, I mean, it literally translates to exactly what you're going to see him do throughout the game.
Hmm.
Now Evie is a little more simplistic, where her name literally just means Eve, which is inspiration for essentially what were the first assassins, right?
Hmm.
Adam and Eve escaped the garden in the biblical sense, but in the Assassin's Creed universe, the garden is where the Isu built all their weapons, and they escaped with the apple.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
So this directly ties Evie back to the earliest assassins that we know of. So in a way, they both kind of mirror the original assassins from that same viewpoint. So it's just kind of a cool play on that whole story.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately though, we've talked about how this is where the larger narrative falls apart, right? Like
Yeah.
we've enjoyed the games up to this stage, except
Hmm.
for you mentioned Unity had some issues.
Yep.
It divided a lot of fans. You and I both. Like I
But yeah, but the
enjoyed parts of it.
multiplayer in that, I
Yeah.
gotta say, the multiplayer was such a fun option in that game.
Oh
Oh, that was
yeah.
a lot of good. That was a good time.
Yeah, it was the only game in the series
Hmm.
that had the multiplayer experience that where you actually could play over aspects of the actual map.
Hmm.
And there was like collaborative maps you could play on because before that point, yeah, the online experience was just pretty much deathmatch and some,
Yeah, it was just PvP stuff. This
yeah,
was more a cooperative, like, oh, you're actually going to work together as assassins to do things and carry
yeah.
out missions, which is really, really fun. And like, did that ever come back? Like that
No,
left and just yeah, which is so weird. I'm like, this was such a great, like, this was honestly like I think the best part of Unity, and it never came back.
they would never do it again. And I'm guessing maybe it just wasn't popular enough. Maybe it put
Hmm.
a sour taste in their mouth, but
Yeah.
but the larger issue here is that obviously we don't speak for all Assassin's Creed fans. So
No,
don't
no.
act like we're the end all be all here.
Mm-mm.
But the larger issue here was that these games, while entertaining to play, I mean, I'm not going to argue that they were fun experiences, but after Unity or after Syndicate, I didn't even really have any interest in playing Origins. And I haven't even to this day opened Odyssey, which I do
Mm-hmm.
own. I've seen Valhalla's gameplay. It looks cool.
Yeah.
I have no intention of buying it. And
Mm-hmm.
I so I think for some of the fans of this series, even though these games are still performing really well, you know,
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's got a
there's
very dedicated fan base to it. Like the
yeah,
people who are like love Assassin's Creed, like they keep going with it.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of grew out of it for
Mm-hmm.
a little bit there because of the fact that I got so attached to the earliest themes of these games
Yeah.
and the wider narrative, and I got so sick of saying goodbye to characters that I couldn't bond with the game
Mm-hmm.
nearly as much anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah. When
formed,
you
yeah,
yeah, when you, like you said, like you get Ezio for 3 games and you have a bond with them, and then you say goodbye to him, and it's hard to do. And you start a new series, like okay, well then I can get attached to someone new, and then Connor's gone.
yeah,
One game,
yeah.
that's all they got. And then same with every other assassin since then. They've
Well,
gotten one game and they're done.
I will fact check you on Connor though, because if you remember,
Hmm.
there was a story about a woman named Aveline de
Oh
Grand
yeah,
Prix.
Connor does get one memory in that game, which is a really fun memory. In
Yes,
not Freedom Cry. Freedom Cry was Adwale.
yeah, that was the first mate of
Hmm.
yeah to Edward Kenway.
Hmm.
And this actually started off as I think it was a PSP or was it was a Vita game.
Yeah, it was a
That's what
Vita
it
game. Yeah,
was.
PSP had already been gone by that time and had moved on. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So Aveline de Grand Prix is who we're referencing now. She's
Hmm.
actually the first Assassin's Creed game that features a female like lead assassin
Hmm.
in the role. And so her game actually took place during the same time as Connor's, the same time as the American Revolution, just down in Louisiana. And so Liberation was it was a really fun game because they actually
Yeah,
ended up remastering that for was it the PS3 or was it the PS4? I can't remember which one.
PS3. I mean, I think actually wait, both because you could get it, you could download it for the PS3, and then you could get it as a remaster package for the
Yeah,
PS4. So when you got Assassin's Creed, the Assassin's Creed 3 remaster, Freedom was just down there with it.
yeah, that's right.
Hmm.
Yep. And so this is the point I wanted to make from long before we even wrote this one up was that
Hmm.
the connections that you have from Assassin's Creed 1 up until Assassin's Creed 4. I mean, I formed my strongest attachments to the assassins and to the stories of them throughout that period.
Hmm.
Like these are the most endearing personalities in the Assassin's Creed universe. I mean, they're literally the ones that allowed the games to continue. And having to say goodbye to those and not have additional experiences with them, it just took me out of the entire experience overall.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And then the best they try doing is you can find like basically Easter eggs through collectibles on things
Yeah.
as the
You have to
games
dig
go
deep.
on.
Yeah, you're digging
Yeah.
deep for that info though.
Oh, you're getting very deep. Like that's the thing. Like there's an Easter egg to Connor in Unity, I think. Or is it Black Flag? I'm trying to remember. It's basically you find that as Connor goes on and becomes, and there's also again like off character, like I mean basically off camera things. He becomes a master assassin for the Americas. Um, he eventually like falls in love with some blonde woman. And then like everything else in Connor's life, they break up and he dies basically alone. It's like, oh well, thanks for that closure on that character, I guess.
Hmm.
We find out that basically his life is nothing but suffering, despite his best attempts to not have it be that way.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, yeah, so like we don't even really get to see him even live out that sorrow, even more from what we already have. We're just told about it through basically an email.
Yeah, so you really just get a lot more context with Ezio because they even filmed those featurettes that focused on his family, including his father as an assassin.
Oh yeah, yeah, that was a lineage.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
Assassin's Creed lineage. I mean, they actually started it off as like a small, like YouTube series. Then they included it in with some of the extended edition parts with the remaster.
Oh,
I
nice. Yeah, I was
mean,
wondering that because I
yeah,
only got it like I remember buying it at like Walmart. It was like the $5 Blu-ray bin, and I'd never even heard of it before.
yeah. They literally made a full feature production just for context on Ezio's family, and they would expand into some other areas that involve Ezio. With there was like three other like small mobile style games that came
Oh
out.
yeah, and then there was like yeah those ones that what were those called? Like I remember like I think they were just like
Chronicles?
almost like small like side-scrolling games, and Ezio was involved in those.
Yeah, was that the Chronicles series?
Yeah, it was Chronicles. That's what it was.
Yeah, so I mean, just think about that. You've got Ezio and so much more background,
Mm-hmm.
but other characters just don't seem to get that.
Yeah, yeah, that extra rich content just isn't there.
Yeah. I mean, I consumed all of it. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
as soon as they gave me information on somebody, I was looking at it because it was intriguing. They were doing some pretty solid world building for a while here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the only thing I will say in potentially revisiting Assassin's Creed, because for the better part of the last few years, I haven't even thought about playing a game for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I will say that I'm not completely turning my back on this series, and it's because when they redid the combat system in three, I threw my arms up in frustration here.
Oh yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's something that we shouldn't try because Origins also did the same thing. They kind of did a soft reboot of the series there with some of the origins of what would eventually become the Assassins. You've got new features. It's more of an RPG style game than the original ones. So you're actually kind of character building again, right? There's some randomization of what you get to fight with. Um, so that alone interests me, in some ways, right? Even though it doesn't necessarily feel like true Assassin's Creed in the original games, but they have taken steps to connect the narrative again, and there are consistent characters from the modern day world within this
Mm-hmm.
who now have appeared within Origins, Odyssey, and now Valhalla. So Ubisoft has listened to the fans from that perspective that we understand we got off the rails a little bit here. So they're trying to rein that back in.
That's
So
appreciated. Yeah, that's nice.
yeah, so I mean
Mm-hmm.
it may be the right time to return to the series and based off of everything we've heard with Origins and now Odyssey and now Valhalla,
Mm-hmm.
uh I really do think it could be a good time to sit down and just see what kind of world they're building now.
Yeah, yeah, it would be fun. And it would be a good break from me just replaying three because I own that game on not every system possible, but basically I own it on three, I own the remaster on four, and I have the remaster on the Switch. I'm yet to play it on the Switch, but I will get there. Um, so it'll be good to like, yeah, break out into a new title in the series instead of replaying my old games.
Yeah, I definitely think it could be time for something new.
Hmm.
And I think that's really kind of a good place to end it as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's the game, the series itself, they've had some really solid themes throughout the
Hmm.
years. So I would say that, Ubisoft hasn't really lost, my trust necessarily, but they just lost my interest for a little while.
Yeah, and I think like you said, I think it's time to get interested again. And after all of that, are we really any closer to finding out what's true and what is permitted?
I mean, I feel like I at least have a better working knowledge of what the Assassin's Creed names mean and how it contributes nothing to solving my life's problems.
Well, at minimum, hopefully you're a fan of Assassin's Creed series and you've learned something that you didn't know before today. I know I did.
Well, to our legion of 3 people listening, we thank you for joining us today. And if you actually enjoyed today's leap of faith, then join the conversation on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook by searching for @DigitalDissect1 or Digital Dissection, a Nerd Podcast. Please also leave us a review, no matter where you found us. And please tell your friends. This will all help us to keep bringing you more quality content in the future and ensure, the likelihood that this channel will survive for another week. But join us next week for an in-depth analysis of the Nicolas Cage modern classic, Gone in 60 Seconds, a film that to this day somehow remains a hidden gem. And until next time, keep on dissecting.